Sophie had always lived in a world of luxury. And raised in an affluent family, she had been taught from a young age to value appearances, wealth, and status above all else. The idea of dating someone beneath her social class was almost unthinkable to her. She was the kind of woman who only attended exclusive events, flaunted designer clothes, and dated men who had power, money, and influence. To Sophie, a relationship was a transaction, something that needed to enhance her social standing. That was until she met Daniel. It wasn't at some lavish gala or a chic rooftop party, where Sophie typically crossed paths with high society men. No, she met Daniel in the most unexpected place, a hotel lobby. He was a janitor, quietly sweeping the floor as Sophie passed by, her heels clicking against the marble. She noticed him immediately, not for his uniform, but for the way he carried himself. He had this warmth about him, a genuine kindness in his eyes that immediately made Sophie stop. He wasn't like the cold, calculating men she was used to. There was something raw and honest about him that made her feel drawn to him, even if she didn't fully understand why. Though she found Daniel handsome in an unexpected way, the idea of being seen with someone in a lowly position made her uncomfortable. She smiled politely, exchanged pleasantries, but that was as far as it went. Sophie had a reputation to uphold. She couldn't risk her high society friends thinking she was involved with someone beneath her. But despite the internal conflict, every time she saw him, there was a part of her that felt something more than she cared to admit. Sophie kept their growing connection a secret, convincing herself that a man like Daniel could never fit into the world she had worked so hard to build. As time passed, Sophie found herself secretly spending more and more time with Daniel. Despite the fact that she kept their relationship hidden, there was something about him that made her heart soften in ways she wasn't used to. They would meet for coffee in quiet corners of cafes or take long walks through the park. Daniel was easy to talk to. He listened without judgment, made her laugh, and seemed to see her for who she truly was, not just as the wealthy woman she portrayed herself to be. He never made her feel out of place, even when she shared moments of vulnerability. Yet, Sophie couldn't ignore the glaring differences in their worlds. Daniel, for all his warmth and charm, worked as a janitor at a luxury hotel. Every time she mentioned his job, she felt an awkward sense of superiority. She'd laugh it off, making subtle comments about how hardworking he was, but in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't measuring up to her high expectations. Daniel never seemed bothered by her comments. He would smile and shrug them off, speaking of his job with a quiet dignity that Sophie couldn't understand. It frustrated her. How could he be content with a life that didn't seem to have any ambition? Sophie, on the other hand, had always been obsessed with climbing the social ladder. She could never imagine settling for anything less than the best. Still, she enjoyed his company, though she couldn't fully admit why. When she was with her wealthy friends, Sophie found herself mocking people like Daniel. Her friends would make snide remarks about lowly jobs, laughing at those who didn't have the right connections or money to back them up. Sophie laughed along, trying her best to keep up the facade. Deep down, she knew she was betraying him, but the fear of losing her status was far more powerful than the small voice that urged her to be honest with herself. She began to distance herself from him in public, always making excuses for why they couldn't meet up or why she was too busy. She convinced herself that she could never truly build a future with him, not when he didn't have the wealth or ambition to keep up with her fast-paced, high-society life. Yet, despite everything, her heart couldn't fully let go of him. It was a conflict Sophie couldn't reconcile. It was a grand gala, the kind of event Sophie thrived in. The ballroom was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of orchestral music. Sophisticated people in designer suits and elegant gowns filled the space, all carefully curated to look as perfect as their reputations. Sophie was right where she wanted to be, surrounded by the who's who of high society, basking in the attention and admiration she'd grown accustomed to. She hadn't told anyone about Daniel, of course. To do so would be to risk tarnishing her image. But as the night unfolded, something unexpected happened. Sophie was standing by the entrance, chatting with some of her closest friends, when a hotel staff member entered the ballroom holding a package. Sophie didn't think much of it until she saw the man delivering it. It was Daniel. The realization hit Sophie like a cold wave. Daniel was dressed in his janitor's uniform, pushing a cart laden with cleaning supplies and a box of deliveries. He didn't see her at first, his focus on his task, but Sophie saw him clearly. The room seemed to go quiet for a moment as a few people nearby noticed the janitor in their midst. Sophie's heart sank. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of panic and embarrassment coursing through her. She wanted to disappear. Her friends, however, did not hold back. One of them, a woman named Claire, smirked and nudged Sophie. "Well, I didn't think you'd bring a cleaning boy as your date tonight," Claire whispered, loud enough for others to hear. Several of the people around them snickered, their gazes flicking between Sophie and Daniel. Sophie tried to brush it off, but the laughter grew, mocking and biting. Sophie felt her stomach twist. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, judging her for the man she had secretly been seeing. It wasn't just the embarrassment, it was the crushing weight of realizing that her friends would never let her live this down. To them, Daniel was a joke, someone beneath them, and in that moment, Sophie realized she couldn't afford to be seen with him any longer, not if she wanted to keep her status intact. Daniel, unaware of the cruel whispers and laughter, glanced up, his eyes meeting Sophie's for the first time that night. He smiled softly, as if nothing was wrong, but Sophie's face went cold. The words were already on the tip of her tongue. "Sophie," Daniel asked, approaching her slowly with the package. Sophie's face tightened, and her heart raced, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford to look weak, to show that she cared. The decision was made. She took a deep breath and, forcing a smile, turned to him, her voice sharp. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, her words cutting through the air. "I can't do this anymore. I could never be with someone like you. You're a janitor. I need someone who matches my life, someone who can keep up with my world." Her words echoed in the vast, luxurious room, and for a moment it felt like everything stopped. Sophie's heart was pounding, but she didn't let herself falter. She looked around at her friends, at the approving nods and whispered conversations that followed. Her mind was clouded with shame and fear, but in that moment, Sophie couldn't bring herself to back down. She had made her choice. Daniel didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just nodded slowly, as if he had known this moment would come. With a small, almost sorrowful smile, he turned and walked away. The eyes of the room followed him as he disappeared into the hallway, leaving Sophie standing alone. As he left, Sophie felt a sting deep within her chest, but she forced herself to ignore it. She had made the right decision, hadn't she? She tried to convince herself of that, but a part of her knew she had just lost something that she could never replace. Days passed after the gala, but Sophie couldn't shake the feeling of what had happened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, his soft, understanding eyes, and that small cryptic smile as he walked away from her. She tried to push the guilt aside, convincing herself that she had made the right decision. After all, her friends were important, and her life was built on a foundation of wealth and status. But deep down, something gnawed at her, a sense of emptiness that she couldn't ignore. It was the evening of a high-profile business event when Sophie's life would take an unexpected turn. She had received an invitation weeks prior, an exclusive gala for some of the wealthiest business moguls in the city. The guest list was a who's who of power and influence, and Sophie was thrilled at the opportunity to rub shoulders with the elite. She put on her best dress, her makeup flawless, and her smile confident. Tonight she would reclaim her place at the top. As she entered the grand hall, the glittering chandeliers reflecting off the polished floors, Sophie's gaze immediately went to her friends. They were clustered around, admiring the expensive artwork on the walls, exchanging business deals and gossip. Sophie made her way toward them, but before she could reach them, someone caught her attention. At the front of the room, near the grand stage, was a man giving a speech to a small crowd. The voice was familiar, but Sophie couldn't quite place it at first. Then she saw his face. It was Daniel, but this was not the same man she had seen weeks ago, dressed in a janitor's uniform. Daniel stood tall, dressed in an impeccable suit, exuding confidence and power. He was the one speaking to the crowd, the one whose name was now on everyone's lips. The crowd hung on every word he said, their eyes wide with admiration. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe it. The man she had dismissed so callously, the janitor she had humiliated, was now standing before her as the CEO of the hotel chain she had once thought was so far beyond her reach. She watched in stunned silence as Daniel spoke about his company's vision, the future of luxury hotels, and how he was transforming the industry. The crowd was rapt with attention, and Sophie felt a cold sweat on the back of her neck. It was then that a realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Daniel hadn't been a janitor at all, he had been undercover assessing how employees and guests treated lower-class workers. He had been gathering information on the very people Sophie admired, studying the dynamics of power and privilege from the inside. Sophie was just one of many people he had encountered, and he had seen the way she had treated him. As if sensing her presence, Daniel turned his gaze toward her, his eyes locking with hers from across the room. For a brief moment, Sophie felt the weight of his stare. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, just quiet understanding, as if he had always known how this would unfold. Her friends who had once laughed at the idea of Daniel and Sophie being together, now looked at him with awe. Their tone had shifted from mockery to admiration. One of them, Claire, who had once made that cruel comment about the cleaning boy, now approached Daniel with a flirty smile. "Mr. Daniels, I'm so glad to meet you. We were just talking about your incredible company. What a visionary you are," she gushed. Sophie's stomach turned. She watched as her friends fawned over him, their attitudes completely transformed. The man they had once laughed at was now the one they all wanted to impress. Sophie felt utterly invisible, like a ghost standing among them. She had no words, no way to fix the mess she had made. Daniel had not only proven that he was far more than what she had assumed, but he had also exposed the shallowness of her world, one that valued status and wealth over integrity and kindness. The reality of what she had lost hit her with a crushing force. Daniel didn't acknowledge her again. He was too busy engaging with the people who now saw him for what he truly was, a successful, influential man. As Sophie stood there, surrounded by her friends, she realized that the price of her arrogance had just become painfully clear. After the event, Sophie could barely focus on the rest of the evening. She had tried to hold her head high, pretending everything was fine, but her mind kept circling back to Daniel. She couldn't stop thinking about how he had stood before everyone, not as a janitor, but as the powerful CEO of the hotel chain. How could she have been so blind? How could she have treated him so callously, all because of his job? The next day, Sophie couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling of regret. She needed to fix this. She had to fix it. She dialed his number repeatedly, but each time he didn't answer, her heart sank with every unanswered call. It wasn't just that she wanted to apologize, she wanted him back more than anything. The truth was, no matter how hard she tried to deny it, she cared for him deeply. She always had. Determined, Sophie decided to visit the hotel where Daniel had worked. She knew he had offices there now, and it was the only place she could think of where she might find him. When she arrived, her palms were sweating, and her heart was racing. She couldn't afford to lose him, not after everything. When she saw him walking toward her in the lobby, Sophie's breath caught in her throat. He was exactly the same in many ways, his warm smile, his confidence, but there was a distance in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Sophie took a step forward, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "Daniel," she began, her voice shaky but determined. "I owe you an apology. I never meant to hurt you. Please believe me. It was just, I was scared. I let everything I was supposed to care about blind me. I'm so sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong." Daniel looked at her with that same quiet, knowing expression. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Sophie could feel the weight of his silence pressing on her chest. Finally he spoke, his voice calm, but laced with a certain finality. "Thank you, Sophie, for your apology," he said. "But what you did wasn't a mistake. It revealed something far deeper, something I could never ignore. You've shown me your true character, and I can't unsee that." Sophie's heart shattered at his words. She reached out to him, her voice desperate. Please, Daniel, I never meant to be that person. I care about you. I need you. Don't walk away from me. I've made a mistake. Please let me fix it. Daniel took a step back, his gaze soft but resolute. It's too late, Sophie. I need someone who values me for who I am, not for what I can offer in terms of status or wealth. You've taught me that I deserve more than to be an accessory to someone's reputation. With a final, almost regretful glance, Daniel turned and walked away, leaving Sophie standing alone in the hotel lobby. The weight of his words lingered in the air, heavy with the knowledge that she had lost him, not just because of her mistake, but because of her own inability to see what really mattered. As the door swung shut behind him, Sophie's tears finally fell. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She had lost someone who truly cared for her, someone who had been willing to look past the surface and love her for who she was. And now, because of her own pride and shallow choices, that person was gone. Forever. Sophie walked back to her car, each step heavier than the last. The weight of what she had lost pressed down on her chest, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of regret. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at her hands, feeling the cold emptiness that had replaced the confidence she had once carried so effortlessly. The truth was undeniable now. She had judged Daniel based on his job, his social status, and in doing so had dismissed the one person who had ever treated her with genuine kindness. Her shallow need to maintain her image, to please her friends, had cost her something far more valuable than status. It had cost her love. Days passed, but Sophie couldn't move on. Everywhere she went, she saw reminders of what she had thrown away. Every laugh, every warm memory of the moments she had shared with Daniel, now tainted with the realization that they were nothing more than fleeting moments of what could have been. She had closed herself off to him, too blind to see what truly mattered, until it was too late. Meanwhile, Daniel had moved on. Sophie saw him occasionally, always in the company of someone who clearly appreciated him for who he was. She noticed the woman beside him, someone who smiled at him with admiration and respect, someone who saw the value of his heart, not his bank account. Sophie watched from a distance, filled with deep regret. She knew that she would never get him back. He had found someone who valued him, someone who understood the importance of love and character over wealth and status. Sophie had learned a hard lesson, one that would stay with her forever, but it was too late. The man she had lost had long moved on, and Sophie was left alone, the echoes of her mistakes haunting her every step. Thank you for watching this emotional journey. Sophie's story is a powerful reminder of how important it is to look beyond wealth and status and appreciate people for who they truly are. Sometimes we learn the hardest lessons when we lose what we took for granted. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Sophie's journey. Do you think she could have redeemed herself, or was it too late? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more heartwarming and thought-provoking stories just like this one. Thanks for being a part of our community, and we can't wait to see you again soon.